Good evening, everybody. Hope you love those banger Christmas tunes. It's funny, I just tweeted someone a second ago. I saw they joined as a participant early on, and wham, Last Christmas was playing, and guess what? They left the webinar. So there you go. My taste in music isn't for everyone. I should say, hopefully, sing out on the chat line if you can. Did I play excellent music? Of course I played excellent music. The playlist was out there. I even tweeted it. You missed some quality stuff. Just someone to make sure they can put something in the chat. Everyone should be able to put in the chat. I'll just answer that one. Go. Someone throw something in the chat. Make sure that's working. I think it should be. Yep, cool. Sounds good. And hopefully you can hear me and see me and all the normal stuff. It is the last office hours for me of the year. Thank you very much for joining me. I imagine most of us are starting to wind down toward the end of the year. But still, I hope we all have a few more minutes of tech left in us. Let me just check the chat here already. Or chat's come up, people saying check, good. Let me just move a couple of windows across so we're sort of seeing what's going on here so I can share my screen properly. Before I do that, be aware that tonight is, I call it slide free. You'll obviously see a few slides, but ultimately it's in terms of the tech content will be predominantly slide free, and hopefully we'll have a bit more banter going on as well. So let me share my screen and we'll be off to go. Once again, hopefully you can still see me, hopefully you can still hear me, and hopefully you'll see getting in touch is easy. As I said, easiest way to get in touch with me is through my Twitter account, which is the Connor McD. DMs are always open. Also, in the world of social media, you can get me on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, podcast, blog, GitHub repo, Mastodon, LinkedIn, you name it. All the ways you can get in touch with me, just go head over to linktree/Connor. Makes it nice and easy. Or if you're one of the new modern folk, you can just scan the QR code and you'll be off and running. Sorry, For those that are new to my office hours, hopefully most of us are regular customers, and thank you for being a repeat customer. The content is generally shifted toward the bottom or the left-hand side, mainly such that when we turn this into a video, my ugly mug does not cover up the content. Nothing more frustrating than when content, the one particular keyword you are searching for, has been covered up with the webinar host. So I shift it all down to the left, and when we edit it, we try make sure you can see all the beautiful technical goodness. As I always do each month, a few bits and pieces just to cover off what's been happening, what's coming up, etc., and hopefully to motivate you to stay active and involved in the Oracle community. As I said, easiest way to get in touch with me on Twitter. As I mentioned last month, sorry, things have been getting a bit weird in the social media world with Elon buying Twitter, and you know, there's just a lot of strange tweets coming out from the man, and there is that rumor that Twitter is end up going to be a bit of a house fire. God forbid anyone tries to use my Twitter account to follow Elon's jet. That would get you suspended straight away based on recent things. So if that happens, what I have done, I did set up a Mastodon social account, which is on effectively my Linktree thing. But if Twitter all goes down in a ball of flames, hopefully it'll emerge from this like a phoenix from the ashes. But if it does all go in like a ball of flames, I'll continue to post on LinkedIn all my tech content, obviously my blog, and also Mastodon as well. So hopefully anyone that's involved in social media can continue on if Twitter does go up in smoke. Hopefully it won't. A few things coming out. Cloud World is obviously long finished now. It was back in September, a fantastic event, great to be there. If you were an attendee, you had access to the catalog and the sessions, but now they're available for everyone, which is why I wanted to just simply bring that to everyone's attention. If you go to YouTube/channel or /C/Oracle, we've broken up the various tracks into playlists, and all the stuff that was recorded at Cloud World or before Cloud World, the video on demand stuff, is now available for the general public. So if you missed Cloud World or missed particular sessions at Cloud World, you can now get them just by heading over to our YouTube channel. I got a lot of flack because I recorded last month's office hours. I published it out, and if you're on last month's office hours, you would have seen I spent about the last 20 minutes doing 23C stuff. When I cut the video, I removed that, and my Twitter DMs lit up like a Christmas tree, no pun intended, simply because people were saying, that's why we came to your damn office hours, where's all the 23C stuff? I took it out because I felt it was all a bit rushed, and so what I thought I'd do is over probably the New Year's break, I'll re-record that same section a bit more slowly, a bit more, carefully, so that we can explain the concepts a bit more accurately, and I'll publish them again at a later date on my YouTube channel. Just because I thought, we were sitting there going, okay, let's do Boolean, let's do this, let's do that, let's do this. And it was very, very rushed. And I figured that's not a great way to introduce a very significant release coming out next year. So I'll re-record those same demos with a bit more time, a bit more slowness, and I'll publish them separately. So they are coming. Apologies for that. In terms of a bonus office hours, I do a monthly office hours. Just a little bit of self-promotion here. Next Tuesday, Tammy Bednar and Suzanne Holiday are running a Exadata customer thing, and multi-cloud, our Azure Oracle partnership. And I'm a guest on their office hours next Tuesday. So I'll be up at about 11 p.m. or midnight, somewhere around there. So if you're in the American or European time zones, please jump on, have a listen, and it'll be good to be a guest as opposed to a host for once. Chat's lighting up already. For 23C stuff, please make sure you only show items that will make it into the release. Otherwise, just tell us to be patient. That's interesting. Someone says, only show the stuff that'll be in the release. I can honestly say the way these decisions are made, and I think this is a good thing, is when 23C, sorry, I'm in sidetracked already. When 23C is pushed into beta, or even before that, as we're building it, there's a set of functions and set of functionality documents that get produced as in what's going to go in the release. And then we build that, we put it in, and then it goes into a beta. In fact, it goes before the beta, lots of unit testing, and then it finally goes into the beta. That does not mean that things in the beta will definitely be in the release. And this is a good thing, because what you want to do is you want to exercise those functions rigorously. That's why we give it out to customers, because they'll think up interesting and useful scenarios that we'd never dreamed of. And then they'll absolutely smash it to death, as we're trying to do internally as well. If we come up with showstopper bugs in a particular function, say 2 weeks out from release, we're not going to go, well, we promised it would be in there, we're just going to throw it in there even though it's got a bug in it. We're going to basically prune that out. And it's not unknown for functions to be ripped out very, very last minute if we do find showstopper bugs. That's what's called being diligent, I would imagine, not being nasty to you. So Pierre, I know it's frustrating. I know it's frustrating. You've said that, when sometimes we pull out functionality very late in the piece, but the reality is sometimes that has to happen, so we deliver a better quality product. Okay, a couple of things. The Ozug Connect series is finished for the year, but just a reminder, the recordings for all of those sessions are held for about 90 days after the event. So you can still register for that event, even though it's gone past. I've got to stop using air quotes. You can register for that event, even though it's past, and then you get access to the videos. They'll expire sometime early in the new year. So if you wanted to see those videos, get on there while they're still there. Call for papers, I think, is still open for Apex World in 31st of March. I went to Apex World a couple of times. Fantastic event. Not just Apex, we talk about PL SQL and SQL as well. Unfortunately, I can't submit for that this year. On March 30th, I will be taking my partner Genevieve on a holiday for a significant birthday of hers. And so, so unfortunately, I won't be participating in that, but fantastic event. I urge you to submit a paper if you live in Europe. Ultimately, what I'm saying is, as I always say every month, support your local user groups. I released a video with a good friend from India recently. Same thing. Support your local user groups. Become a volunteer. You'll be amazed the benefits it has for you. And finally, a little bit of promotion. My podcast has 2 new episodes since last month we saw. I had a great conversation with Dom Giles. So part 1 came out a couple of weeks ago, and part 2 came out just last week. So anyone that knows Dom Giles, he often gives talks at Oracle events in terms of upcoming features. Very, very intelligent guy, especially in terms of Oracle database. He's been with Oracle for 30 plus years, knows the product inside out. So some great fun chats with him on my podcast. I put this video out there. I hope it'll be a bit jittery, I'm sure, on Zoom. This is the only slide, of tech content you'll see tonight. The rest is pretty much just a little bit of interaction and sort of, let's go forward one, what I call you go, I go. So here's the deal. I tweeted a couple of weeks ago, I said my last office hours for the year will be just Q&A. Basically Q&A, you can either send them to me as DMs or you can do it live on the night. And I want to respect both those sets of audiences. So the ones that I've received in advance, I've put in here just as text on the slides and no pictorials and stuff like that. But ultimately, it's me just answering them hopefully live. Or you can put questions in the chat. And what I'll do is effectively such that everyone gets a say. I'll bounce back and forth. So if you put a question in the chat, I'll treat that, and then I'll take one of the slides. If there's no questions in the chat, that's fine. I'll just go through the questions that have come in advance. I've got a couple of demos associated with them. But yeah, this is your night tonight. So if you have questions, you can throw them in and they will effectively take priority of the content I've got. And we'll simply bounce back and forth and hopefully have some fun. Check my time. Yeah, we're doing okay. So here's your choice, right? If anyone's got a question, they can throw it in the chat. Okay, oh, here we go. Morton said, can you show something on Graal JavaScript stored procedures? Not off the cuff. However, Martin Bach is currently putting together, I'm pretty sure, a presentation and also some demos on precisely that. So what I will do, let me make a note, is straight after this office hours, let me speak to Martin because he's been doing some work on it. And we'll see if we can get him as a guest on office hours or run his own office hours, and we'll see if we can do a little bit of that. Okay, another question. Okay, tell you what, let me kill my slideshow while questions are coming in. Can we talk a little bit about attribute clustering and possible drawbacks? Certainly, Martin. I'm a big fan of attribute clustering, and in terms of the benefits and drawbacks, let's start with the benefits first. I actually have demos. In fact, here we go, self-promotion. If you head over to my YouTube site, you'll see effectively a video on attribute clustering, but we'll talk briefly about it now. For those that are unfamiliar with it, there is a dictionary property you can put on the database that says this particular table, I would like to have its data clustered in a certain way. And what clustering is effectively is rearranging the data such that common values are stored together. Classic example would be, say, customers buying things from a website. Customer 1 comes on in January and they buy something. And also in January, customers 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 also buy things. Customer 1 comes back in March and they come back in September and they come back in December. You know, they do what customers do. They buy things when it suits them, not when it suits us as IT professionals. What that means is even if I have an index on the customer column on that sales table, when I want to go effectively to get all the records for, say, customer 1 logs on and says, show me my transaction. Well, that index would be nicely densely packed for the customer keys, but each key value, customer 1, the first row will be in January. That'll be in a block somewhere here in the table. The next one's in March. The next one's in September. The likelihood of that data all sitting in common blocks is very low because tables grow chronologically, typically. So rows in January won't be near rows in March, won't be near rows in September. So if that customer has 1,000 transactions, I'm probably looking at 1,000 individual block reads against the table, even though the index quickly lets me identify those blocks. It says, yes, here's 1,000 rows for that customer, but I'm going to do 1,000 block reads for it. That's going to be costly. Attribute clustering is a dictionary operation that simply says, I'd like my data to be clustered, in this case by customer ID. That does nothing. It effectively is a dictionary operation. But the next time I reorg that table, if I do alter table move online, I export import it, I do just alter table move, etc. I drop the table and reload the data from scratch. Anything which is a bulk load operation, a direct mode operation, it obeys that dictionary specification we made. So if I do alter table move online, the customer table will now be reshuffled in order of customer ID. Now customer ID 1, all his data are commonly located. So it's still the 1,000 rows in there, but there's a good chance that those 1,000 rows are no longer in 1,000 table blocks. They're probably in 20 table blocks because they're all co-located. So all of a sudden, queries on customer ID are breathtakingly fast. But in terms of the drawbacks, what I've taken data that was originally most likely chronologically ordered, simply because that's the order it came into the table, and now reshuffled it so it's ordered by customer. That's great for customer queries. But what about queries by timestamp? A common query might be, show me all last week's transactions. Well, that originally would have been last week's transactions, all sort of probably co-located in a small set of blocks. Now they're most likely scattered throughout the table because I've reshuffled the data in order of customer. So attribute clustering generally becomes a case of robbing Peter to pay Paul, as the saying goes. But I still think it's a very good thing because one of the things you can do is you can cluster by multiple columns. And that's a compromise approach. What you're doing is you won't get perfect clustering by customer, but you might get reasonable clustering by, say, customer and product. So both of them are not perfectly optimal in terms of clustering, but they're better than if the data was just randomly scattered. So you can cluster by multiple columns as well. But ultimately what you do is you say, what's important to me? I got my application. We might do queries by product, by customer, by timestamp, and by some ad hoc query stuff. What's going to make or break my application? If it's queries by customer, which, let's face it, in a sales kind of operation is probably where you're going to be, then I would probably cluster by customer. Now, queries then by timestamp might be slower. But what I might be doing is saying, okay, customers, my end users will come in and query by customer. I'll make their experience fantastic. And that will cost me internally. I'll be doing my weekly reports, which look for last week's data, last month's data. They're going to run slower. I'm going to have to come up with maybe different mechanisms to speed them up, maybe different indexes, maybe some petitioning, etc. But I'm taking that hit in order to give a better experience to the people that matter most, which is the customer. So attribute clustering gives you effectively, it's robbing Peter to pay Paul. Hopefully that helps explain that. Thanks, Martin. Okay, Q&A question that came in. So someone on a similar topic. So the difference between the old index hash cluster since Oracle 5 to attribute clustering is the first is enforced and the second is more like a recommendation. Yeah, I'd say that's one way of wording. I'm just going to recommendation is the word. I think one is it's a two-step process. One is you set the dictionary operation, and then the second thing is you then take some step to force the data to become clustered. But you are right in the sense that once you have clustered the data and done an operation, normal DML will not obey that. It's effectively added to the end of the table or put into free space in the normal way. So your data starts to become declustered as such. The benefit of that, of course, is you still have a heap table. So the insert performance is dramatically faster than things like an index or a hash cluster. So what you're doing is effectively you're giving yourself better standard transactional performance against a heap table. And then at some stage coming up with mechanisms to then reshuffle the data. Thanks for that. Okay. Next question. How much does direct path inserts and data pump import suffer from that? Effectively, it's similar to what you will be doing as a create table as select with a order by clause. The data has to be sorted. If your temporary table space is very slow, or you don't have much PGA, or you have effectively anything that would normally slow down normal kind of sorting operations, then effectively you're going to pay a penalty there as well. But I should note that in the same way that if you've ever done a group by or a select distinct in modern versions of Oracle, it's often not a sort that we do. We often just do for example, you'll see group by hash or hash unique, hash distinct. So we can use hashing functions to avoid massive PGA overhead if necessary. Because I know people like their demos. But there, awesome. That's what we want. Basically, I'll do a couple from the slides and then we'll do some from the chat if they come in, and we'll bounce back and forth because it's the last office hours of the year. So here's one that came in advance. We use CLOBs and we set our secure file to preferred. I'm not sure that it's the default, but we seem to get some CLOBs that are still basic file. What are we doing wrong? And I'll be pleased to let this person know you're doing nothing wrong. We at Oracle are doing something wrong. Let's show you that with a quick demo. First demo of the night. If you're using any modern version of the database, the default for CLOBs nowadays is set by DBSAT and we set it to preferred. Effectively, I think back in when we first introduced this parameter and first introduced secure files, the parameter I think was maybe like none, or maybe I can't remember what it was, but effectively we would go with basic files unless you explicitly said secure files. And as we become more comfortable with them, now it becomes the preferred. So this is the default, it's set to preferred. If I create a table called CLOB test, it's got a CLOB there called CLB1. If I add another column called CLB2, there's two CLOBs in there now. Let's go have a look at user CLOBs, and we can see that CLOB1 and CLOB2 are both secure files. I think you can safely say that is the least interesting and impressive demo you've seen for some time. The database said it was going to do secure file LOBs. I created a table and added some LOBs, and guess what? That was secure file. That's hardly profound. Let's drop our table and explore a bit further. I'm going to create a table called CLOB test. It's got, once again, CLOB CLB1 in it, CLOB number 1, and it's partitioned. Let's add another CLOB to that table, alter table, add a CLOB called CLOB. Now let's go look at the LOBS table. And yes, we have a bug. Even though DB SecureFile is set to preferred, when you add a CLOB to a partition tables, we are not obeying that operation, that parameter. We are actually creating it as a basic file. That's not ideal. If you actually did alter table, add CLB file, store as secure file, then it will respect that. It's only if you're relying on the default and you're adding it to a partitioned table. So what do? Let's drop it. As we see, our parameter is set to preferred. Let's up the ante a little bit. Let's now set it to always, which is like the next level up. So now it's always. Let's create our partition table again. It's got CLOB1 in there already on the create table. We add another CLOB, and nope, that doesn't work either. When you add that CLOB, the CLOB we created with the table was fine. When we added a CLOB, then yes, unfortunately, we get no. So what do we have to do? Let's drop our table. Let's up the ante even more. If you do set secure file equals force, either at session level or at system level, then it's now set to force. I create my partition table, I add another CLOB, and they're now set to yes. What this means is, if you have jumped on the secure file train, which hopefully you all are, because ultimately you get so many more options, you get compression, deduplication, plus you also get just better performance, better handling, and you're using partitioning, and you're regularly adding CLOBs to a table as opposed to putting them there in the first place, then yeah, it's probably worthwhile having a look and making sure you set DB secure file to force to make sure they're never going to roll back into basic file. I wanted to show this there because it's a good question, and also it lets people know that it's probably worthwhile going back and checking if you have any partition tables that do have CLOBs in them and you're not entirely sure that those CLOBs were added either at create time or added at a later date. Maybe go have a look in user LOBs and just make sure that the secure file setting is what you expect them to be. Express Edition. I love Express Edition, especially from 21, from 18C onwards and 21C. Effectively, it's almost everything that's in Enterprise Edition, plus all the extra license paid options, all for free. Love the fact that people get to now explore just about everything you could do with the Oracle database, and they're not going to cost them a cent, and they don't have to worry about, am I overstepping some license particular restrictions? So here's the question. We're trying to upgrade our version of Apex on Express Edition, because when you install Express Edition out of the box when we configure, I think we throw Apex in there. The database says we've hit our 12 gigabyte limit on the size of the database. We don't give away the database for free, except with some restrictions. I'm pretty sure we're well under it. How can we get our upgrade done? And this is a question that came in actually several weeks ago, maybe even months ago, but I've been holding off until I had a chance to cover it in office hours. And it's the way we calculate the 12 gig limit that you probably need to be aware of, because it's not really necessarily related to Apex. It's related to how we measure the space in XC, and it could catch out a whole lot of people if they're using XC. So I wanted to talk about it tonight. Now I'm going to try something here. Let's see what happens. Seeing out in the chat line, if you can't see now me and a piece of paper, that's my second webcam now pointing down at the desk. So hopefully you can see my hands. So let's talk about Express Edition. Oh, I've got a question in the chat line. Yes, Judith said DB secure file equals force is missing from the documentation. Well, yeah, I wasn't going to reveal that, was I, Judith? But yes, it is. We'll take care of that. So let's talk Express Edition. As we know, Express Edition, I can't remember, I think it's maybe 2 gig of RAM, 12 gig of storage, 1 CPU. Anyone putting comments about my writing quality on the chat line is going to get punted. So the 12 gig is the thing. Yeah, I've got some videos on my YouTube channel also which talk about it's amazing how much work you can actually get done even just with 1 CPU on XE, because the database runs so fast. You can do a lot of stuff. So generally the limiting clause is your 12 gig. Now, anyone who's a DBA on the call who's done a query to DBA extents or DBA segments knows that those queries take a fair while to run. And the reason they do is we don't store the extents in the data dictionary as such. We used to do that. There used to be a couple of internal tables called UET dollar, FET dollar, but they would become points of contention. So now the information about how data files are being utilized is stored in the data files themselves in bitmaps, which means as you do queries like DBA extents, DBA segments, we are querying generally the data files themselves and scanning along these bitmaps. So it can be expensive, takes a while, but let's face it, you don't really need to do it that often. However, what that does mean is for something like Express Edition, where we have caps on the number of space you can use, it would be impractical for us every time you needed to allocate an extent, like an index grows, a table grows, to say, okay, let's do a check and see if they've exceeded the limit. That would hurt you because every time your tables grew, you'd see this pause in operation. So we don't do that. What we do is we keep an eye on the data file sizes. So what do you get in your typical Express? You've got system, sysorgs, users, and undo typically, right? We don't generally look at that or that in terms of space. Now, you might be thinking, oh, that's okay. What I'll do is I'll stick all my stuff in the system table space and I'll be able to bypass the limit. Well, the way we avoid that is we know that by default, normally the total sum of the data files, so maybe that's say 4 gig and that's say 6 gig, the total sum of the data files can't exceed 12 gigabytes. Now you might be thinking, oh, I'm going to jam it all in system then, for example, to try circumvent the system. One thing we also do is we say, okay, no data file is allowed to get to 12 gigabytes. If it gets to 12 gigabytes, your database is full, effectively. Now, what does that create for us? I'm going to rip this off and go into the page because I've been too exuberant. Let's draw sysorgs and users. So what's in sysorgs typically? Well, when you install Apex, it'll be in there. Plus things like or your audit information, or your internal repository stuff like your optimizer stats, or your job schedule logs, etc. All that stuff is stored in sysorgs, and here is generally your user data. When you come to upgrade Apex, well, if this has gone out to 12 gigabytes, and that's say Apex 21, and now you want to put in Apex 22, you've got a problem because temporarily you want to go out past this 12 gigabyte limit, and that's not going to be allowed. You're going to have a problem there. The only way you could do it would be to drop Apex, export all your applications, and then export all your applications, all your data, drop Apex 21, install Apex 22, and then re-import it all back in again. That's not going to be fun. So you don't want to get into a scenario where 2 versions of Apex is going to push you over the 12 gig limit. Now, as you're seeing, as you're running your system, you might be thinking, oh yeah, well, I'm getting pretty close. That's okay. I'll do that time-honored thing of what I'll do is I'll start dropping information that I don't need in my table space. And then I'll do alter table move to bring things back down below the high watermark, because your typical sysorgs table space might be out around 12 gigabytes, but we've got information in here, information in here, information in here, but we've got lots of free space. So if I got something up around here, what I'll do is I'll do an alter table move. And what the database does is when you do move, it finds the lowest point and sticks it in there. And then you can reshuffle that data file markdown. That all sounds very straightforward, easy to do. But what's in sysorgs? Well, you've got things like optimizer history tables. What have we got in there? Long columns. You can't move a table if it's got a long column. So if it's out here, you're in trouble. You've got audit information. You can't move the audit information with alter table move. It's barred, it's prohibited. In fact, the only thing you can do with audit information is to set a new table space. And there's a DBMS audit management or DBMS audit and admin package that lets you choose a new table space for it. And the database will over time move new data into the new one and old stuff will go out. The job scheduler grows ad infinitum pretty much because I think we keep 60 days by default. But the key things are probably these two. Because of long columns and because of audit information, you can get to a point where all you need is a single audit table out around this 12 gigabyte mark, and you can't move it. And if you can't move it, you can't shrink the data file. And if you can't shrink the data file, you're dead in the water. So what does that mean? Some recommendations. If you're deploying XE and deploying Apex or anything on XE, And I'm hoping to build a script or utility, which I'll either put on my blog post or I'll actually hopefully fold into the product if someone will let me, where you want as little as possible going into sysorgs if you're worried about that you're one day going to exceed those 12 gigabyte limits. So on day one, when you install XC, you would use DBMS audit admin to make sure the audit goes into its own table space, audit TS. You would set all the optimizer retentions. At the moment, they default, I think, to 30 days. Drop them down to 7. Make sure those tables cycle through very, very quickly. Your job scheduler, DBMS, DBA scheduler job log, DBA scheduler job details, etc. All that stuff gets stored, I think, for 60 days in sysorgs, right? Set that, maybe set that down to 7 days. Maybe set that down to 7 days. All these things that have to stay in sysorgs, make them low retention. So they're cycled through fast. They won't burn up much sysorgs. Anything you can move out of sysorgs, like the audit, put it in its own table space. If you're installing Apex, install it in its own table space. Don't let anything go into sysorgs that it doesn't need to be, because otherwise, if sysorgs gets out to 12 gig, that's the end of it pretty much for you. You're going to be in strife. You'll be able to grow your existing applications into free space wherever it is, but it's very easy to start getting these erroneous warnings because one of your data files is at 12 gig, and pretty much we're going to shut the door on you. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to try put all that into a blog post with a list of commands that you should run when you first install XC to give you a setup where you can get maximum benefit and maximum duration out of your XC platform, and especially if you're worried about going near 12 gigs. So hopefully that helps. Q&A. Okay, another question. Let me kill off that share. Question from Dennis. We have a query to find space used by a schema, which is taking 5 minutes to run. The query is select some bytes from DBATS quotas where username equals Scott. We've tried other views, but this seems to be the fastest. We use on 12.1, our database has 16,000 schemas with 1.7 terabytes of data. Do you have any suggestions? Okay, I would say that the quickest, but also least accurate, is to rely on the optimizer statistics. So you could simply do select some blocks times your block size from DBA tables for the tables, and same from indexes, do some leaf blocks. So it will undercount by a little bit, but it's going to get you relatively close to that kind of that kind of number. If it's being run by an application and you can't control it, then yeah, I think you're going to be in trouble there, because there's no tuning you can do on DBATS quotas. One thing you can do is, even though it's a query on a dictionary, you can still do things like SQL plan management on dictionary queries. So if you can come up with some alternate plans where you actually make it run faster, because you can push hints into the views. If you look at DBATS quotas, like any DBA view, is just you can get the definition of that from DBMS metadata, and so you can actually drive hints into the views. Or common one is just throw a big dynamic sampling hint on the query. Let the database run really, really hard just once to see what so we come up with the best plan by dynamically sampling the data, come up with that plan, hopefully it's better, and then lock it in with SQL plan management and maybe get some benefit that way. Hopefully that helps. Okay. Q&A coming in. Q&A said, thanks. That's the easiest question to answer. 16,000 schemas. That's pretty impressive. Okay, back to the slides. Okay, this is the next one. If anyone's got a question, we'll bounce in. Otherwise, we'll do this one. Okay. I like this one. People are now starting to store emojis in our comments fields in our application. When we're trying to append that data to CLOBs with such characters in it, we encounter errors about partial characters. And this is a common one, especially when you're doing DBMS LOB write append. And if you've ever looked at DBMS LOB, most of the routines, whether you're getting some data out, adding some data, replacing data, effectively they take obviously a parameter of an incoming LOB, maybe an outgoing LOB, some buffer information that you want to get back or put in, and the key one you put in is a length parameter. How many bytes or characters do I want to append, replace, substitute, etc.? And that's where this person's having some problems. in this particular case, it was DBMS LOB write append, and they're trying to add an emoji in there, just a single emoji character, and the database is complaining. So let's see why. Now, the first thing you'll notice is because I'm running a Windows machine here and it's running just stock standard, I think, Gonzales font in MS-DOS, I try to print out the emoji. That's the Unicode for emoji, and you don't get it. Now, I could change my DOS to have a different code page, etc. But just to let you know that is indeed the emoji, let me do a new share again. So hopefully you believe me that yes, that is indeed the emoji. You can see a little smiley face there. Now, here's where this customer was getting into grief. They do select length effectively of an emoji character, and they get length as 1. That makes sense. You saw the emoji, it's this little smiley face, its length is 1, it's 1 character, length is 1. If you try write an emoji character into a CLOB, like with DBMS LOB write append, for example, and specify the length of 1, I didn't put it here, I should have, you get an error. It says you've specified a partial multi-byte character. You might be thinking, well, I can see here it's 1, 2, 3, it's 4 bytes. Maybe I should pass a length of 4. If you do that, you'll get an error as well. Let's explore why. If I do DBMS LOB get length on that particular CLOB, it says the length is 2. And if you pass in 2 as a parameter to write append, I want to write a single emoji. What do I pass in as the amount? I should pass in 2 and then it will work. Now, the question is why. And immediately this becomes a recommendation for me. You should always use DBMS log.getLength if you're trying to work out the length of a CLOB. This is probably the easiest way of explaining it. Here's my smiley. I've just called it smiley, the emoji smiley. DBMS log.getLength returns me 2. Length returns me 1. Length in characters, length C, returns me 1. Length bytes returns me 4. Length 2 returns 2, and length 4 returns 1. These are pretty much the critical ones in this particular case, and it very much depends on your database character set. This is a multi-byte character set. My database is multi-byte. It's the default, which is AL32 UTF-8. In a multi-byte database, a multi-byte character set database, what happens is CLOBs and LOBs are stored in what we call UCS2 format, effectively multiples of 2-byte strings. 2-byte pairings. What that means is the emoji, which is this, requires 2 sets of UCS2 values to be stored, which is why DBMS log returns it as 2, which is why when you're using it in DBMS lob.writeAppend, etc., you want to specify 2, not 1 and not 4. So because this is a multi-byte character set using UCS AL32 UTF-8, which means the CLOBs are in UCS2, we would use the length 2 function. Rather than having to have all that twist around in your head, generally DBMS lob.getLength when you're looking for CLOBs is going to be the way to go. And as the documentation says, it says whenever you're using the amount figure to add, remove, subtract, manipulate LOBs, it says for LOBs, for blobs, it's the amount of bytes, and for CLOBs, it's the amount of characters. But we need to understand what those characters are. So hopefully that explains that nice, simple question. Questions coming in on the chat? Oh, it's a quiet group tonight. That's okay. I don't mind. A quick drink of water for me. Beautiful day in Perth. 32 degrees today in Perth. Fantastic. I mentioned that because I have been seeing on the news Europe, there's snow everywhere. People, ice and terrible things. I lived in London for a long time, but I never saw snow on that much. Okay, questions come in. Back to SecureFile. We have a very big partition table, 27 terabytes, which suffers from a column with basic file. Would you recommend an online operation DBMS redefinition? I'm concerned if it will work, which means we have more than double the space to 54 terabytes. Or do you have any magic other command in your hat? Well, Caesar, this is your lucky night. Let me fast forward a bit. Okay, this is similar to what we're trying to achieve here, but I think this will help. So let me talk about this question and hopefully this will help you. We need to add a new CLOB column to an existing table, but that CLOB needs to be backfilled with a static value. What is the best way to do this? Now, Caesar, the reason this is relevant to you is to modify this thing, you would have to ineffectively probably have to add a new CLOB, copy the data over, etc., if you're going to do a static update. I'm not entirely sure. I don't think you can do modify basic file to secure file, not even in 19 or 21. But let's look at this little demo and we'll see how we go. So how do we backfill data in a CLOB? Or how do we add CLOB columns and populate them very, very quickly? So I'm going to create a table here. It's 12 copies of DBA objects. It could be a lot more, but when we add zoom into the equation here and video recording, then what will probably happen is it'll slow down my demo. So I chose 12 to hopefully keep the demos not too expensive. For several versions now, if you've added if you want to add a column, let me try that again in English. For several versions now, if you want to add a new column to a table, and you want it to be not null, and you want to have it a value, which suggests that you would have to go back and back populate every single column or every single row, it's instantaneous. And the reason that works is we do it with a dictionary hack now. We simply set a flag in the dictionary saying, oh yes, this column's there, and please, whenever you query it, go get its default value and assume it was always present. So even though it's not null, and we want to have don't use air quotes, even though it's not null and we want to backfill it, the database can do it with a little bit of trickery. So can we do the same thing with a CLOB? Well, the answer is unfortunately no. As you can see here, I'm doing the exact same thing, but as I add the CLOB, it takes a long time. This is why I only did 12 copies of DBA objects. So talk amongst yourselves. Now, what's going on here? The main problem is a CLOB generally requires additional structures sitting under the database. In this case, it wouldn't, because the CLOB is so small, it would be stored in line. But typically, if you're adding a large CLOB, what's going to happen is we have to build the LOB structure, the log segment, and the LOB indexes underneath and pin all that information to it. So we haven't implemented a fast default add operation for CLOBs, and I don't think we probably will, simply because of the management involved. As you can see, it took 15 seconds. It only took 1.3 seconds to create the table, but as you can see, we've obviously had a long, significant pass through all the data. Let's now add a simple varchar2 column, and this is a slight departure from the CLOB briefly. Let's add a varchar2 column once again with the default without not null, and that's instantaneous as well because we don't have to go backfill the data. Here's my list of table columns. Column 1x, that was the simple value from DBA objects that my connect from Joule. The rest is a few columns from DBA objects. And we've got CLOBs. Column 1, which is varchar2, column 2 a CLOB, and column 3 is the one we just added. That's default without a not null. But if we go look at user tab cols, one thing that's worth noting is if you do just go add a column with a default into the database, if it's not marked as not null, the database stores some hidden information, which I don't understand why we actually do this, but my assumption is it's being stored in there to indicate effectively at some point in time where which columns do have this value and which columns don't, etc. I'm not entirely sure, but we do, one of the implementation details is we add a hidden column, and you can see it's sysnc and it's column number 10, and it's stored in the 10th place. The exposed columns still say 1 to 10, but this is a hidden column. So we actually have 11 columns in the table, and 10 of them are visible to you. Now, why is that significant? Well, if we go look at that column, we can see it's hidden. It's a raw column. And I think it's more just its presence there that is indicative of something, because if I query it, there's no data in it. There's nothing in it, but its presence obviously is some special marker in the data dictionary that indicates the fact that we've added a column that's not null, that has a default. But what that does mean, though, if you do have added a column to a table with a default that is nullable, let's say I've got a partition table, which is an exact copy of that table called T I just got. It's partition, but it's an exact copy. Everything's, the structure's the same. If I try to do an exchange partition with tpar and t, which as we saw here, effectively identical, it doesn't work. And that's because when I created tpar, it didn't pick up that hidden column. You may remember from 12.2, we added this create table for exchange command to solve this issue. But it's worth noting that just the fact of adding a column that's nullable with a default will add a hidden column to your table. And that implies things like you have to be careful when you're dealing with partitioning, etc. But let me return back to our CLOB. So as we saw, it took a long, long time to add a CLOB with a default that's not null to our table. What if I try adding it with default without not null? So this column is actually nullable now. So it's only going to be future columns that need to do that. Well, guess what? Even that is going to take our 15 seconds. The act of adding a CLOB with a default, even though we're not actually back populating the data, still does this enormous amount of work. So it's important to realize that even with a default of nullable, it's going to take a long time to do. So it seems we're stuck trying to do heavy duty maintenance with CLOBs. Let me compute statistics now and see why things are perhaps even worse than we think. Now, you might be thinking, why aren't I using DBMS stats? The reason I'm using compute statistics is I want to see the chain count on the table. And we can see that in this table, the act of adding CLOBs, either the not null one or this one, has literally chained almost a big, huge chunk of the rows. 500,000 rows are chained. So adding CLOBs to a table, whether they're default with not null or default of null, you're going to have this problem here. So what do? Here's a mechanism that might be useful in terms of how to add CLOBs or modify CLOBs on a table and keeping the downtime low. The resource cost is high, but the downtime should be low. I can add a CLOB without a default, and that's instantaneous. That's no cost. I can then modify that CLOB to have a default that picks up all new values, and that's instantaneous as well. One of the cool things that came in with DBMS redefinition a long time ago, well, I'd say a long time ago, I think maybe 18, was it's not just now for redefining tables. If I want to execute a large update, I have this DBMS let's try that again. I have this DBMS redefinition execute update. I simply pass in my update statement. And you think, well, what's the benefit here? It's just running update. It's not. It's actually doing what DBMS redefinition does when you change a table. It's creating a copy of the table, but using this update as a way of invisibly and behind the scenes using its column mapping feature to do the update as it creates this new version of the table. It's doing some journaling to keep track of changes. So this table is aptly updatable and active for transactions while this is going on. And then it completes. So this is the resource expensive part. It's going to burn up a lot of resource. It's going to take a long time because we're actually creating a copy of the table to effectively apply this update. But that's generally going to be far more efficient than just doing a genuine update. Create table as select is very, very efficient. Now that I've done that, now I can make it not null with no validate, which means from now on, all new changes cannot be nullable. So effectively, I'm getting that extra step closer. Now I need to make sure that that constraint is actually validated as well, because the database needs to know that a constraint has been validated in order to take care of certain optimizations. With a CLOB, it's probably not such a big deal. You could probably skip this last step, but let's put it in there anyway. So I can go find the name of the constraint that is C5 is not null. That's the name of the constraint. I've stored it in the value called cons, and then I can do alter table modify cons enable validate. The reason I did this as a not null no validate first and then enable validate is that's instantaneous, but does take a lock. This one does not lock the table. You can do enable validate on a constraint and the table stays open for business. So what I've got now is effectively I've added a CLOB. I've done a large update on those CLOBs. It's now got a default value. It's not null. And the whole time, the only downtimes were little tiny locking operations. This part here was done with the table available to users. And because it was done under the scenes as a create a new copy of the object, if I come do compute statistics now, even though I added a CLOB and I back populated it, there's no chained rows because I took a new copy of the data. So hopefully that helps when it comes to CLOB maintenance. And Caesar, hopefully that helps you in terms of, well, yes, you are unfortunately up for 54 terabytes temporarily, but hopefully that last set of steps shows you that you could do this. It's going to take a long time. 27 terabytes copying from one place to another is going to take a long, long time, but it's going to be done while the table is available for use during that operation a la DBMS redefinition. So hopefully that helps. So Morton has said, speaking of raw and default values, how am I going to keep it on the time? Yeah. Oh, I just remembered something you might be able to answer. When you have default values for parameters and procedures and packages, we can get that they're default in the dictionary, but not what the default value is. The column is there in user arguments, but in the docs, it has the famous reserve for future use comment. I seem to remember we could get it from sys.arg in old days, but that is not possible anymore. Would you happen to know where we can get it besides standing source dollar? I don't know offhand, but I will do some research and see if I can find out. Okay, defaults for parameters in PL SQL. I think that transition from disappearing from sys.args came around the time frame when, do you remember it used to be the case when if you changed a table or a view, etc., then procedures all became marked invalid. And then we lowered the granularity down to effectively, yes, now a procedure can know what columns it uses in a table or a view, and it's only if you change those particular columns that a procedure gets marked invalid. That jump of granularity, I remember, caused a big reshuffle of stuff the way they were stored in the dictionary in order to facilitate that. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's probably what's gone on there. But I'll do a bit of digging around. I'll ask some people and see what I can find out for you. And it'll be a blog post or something. Done emojis. Okay, let's talk about DBSAT. And that might be all we can. Oh, we might squeeze a few more in. It's 9:53. Oh no, the questions coming on the chat. Morton said thanks. Phew. Okay. Question. We've been using DBSAT, which is a free security analysis tool. We've recently seen a new offering called DataSafe, which is also free. Should we move to that? The answer to that is a very cryptic yes and no. If you're not familiar, DBSAT is a set of, I think, Perl routines that runs, and very, very cool utility, and it is free. You can use it anywhere. You download it off My Oracle Support or MetaLink if you're old school like me, and effectively, it's a set of routines. You connect to the database, and it does what you would call an auditor's pass. It's looking for things with default passwords. It's looking for accounts that should be locked that aren't. It's looking for password links, verification functions, just the normal things you would do if you're doing a security analysis or security audit on your system. The nice thing is it's free. You download it, you run it. It produces a lovely HTML report in the same kind of vein as an AWR report. There's hyperlinks. You can jump back and forth. And often it's a great way of, especially, don't get me wrong, it's not saying if you run this and it gives you a pass mark that your system is guaranteed rock solid secure. But it's a very useful tool, especially to simply say, run it, is everything got a tick, everything coming up in green? You can show that to an auditor, say, yes, we're at least doing our due diligence here. We are at the bare minimum covering all the things that DBSAT is looking at. Now, DataSafe, you may have seen if you're using Oracle Cloud, is like DBSAT on steroids. It encompasses all of that, plus it's got things like sensitive data analysis. You can effectively point at a database and it'll say, okay, based on column names, definitions, which of these are things that you might want to look at either securing away or redacting or masking, credit card, social security, customer names, etc. So it has a repository of things that you would typically consider sensitive. It can effectively run across your entire cloud landscape, etc. Now, it is free for your cloud databases. If you've got a cloud system going up, then yes, you can run DataSafe on it. But if you want to point it at an on-premise database, then it is not free. Now, as I said, I'm not a licensed expert, but that is my understanding. You'd reach out to your account manager to confirm that, but I'm pretty sure if you're running DBSAT on your on-premises database, you can't then just jump into a cloud console, grab DataSafe and say, point it at that same on-premise database and do it for free. I think there's a fee to doing it on your databases that are outside Oracle Cloud. So yes, DataSafe is very cool. It's a bigger version, bigger, smarter, more broad, more thorough version, and nice UI version of DBSAT. But if you're going to run it on your on-premises databases, then I think we're going to charge you for it. I think it might have been $200 per database, something like that. Don't quote me on that, but it's somewhere in that vicinity. So it's probably worth the investment, but please be aware it's free on cloud, but it's not free elsewhere. So worthy of note. What do we got left? Oh, 5 minutes left. Can we get one more done? Yeah, maybe. Okay, last chance for a question in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to talk about this one. Okay. We want to head toward a zero downtime model for our application deployments. The only thing I see is EBR, edition-based redefinition, but that looks way too complicated. Are there other options? I'm going to tackle this by saying I don't believe it's too complicated. And I'm not being critical of the question that came in. I'm being critical of us as an organization. For a long time, we have pitched EBR as, if you're going EBR, you have to go the absolute whole way in. You have to totally embrace it. You have to go the cross edition triggers. You never have an outage again. It's all it's all in or all out. And don't get me wrong, it can be done that way because, for example, our own Oracle e-business suite delivers the vast majority of its patches via EBR. And let's face it, if you can use EBR for a system that has 25,000 tables and indexes, it's probably going to work for you as well. But that requires a good deal of investment in utilizing the facilities. I'm not sure if Oren's on the call. Sing out in the chat if you are, Oren, but Oren's a great exponent of EBR. I know the companies he worked for use it extensively and as a result have minimal downtime. And you can, and we encourage you to go that way. If you're going EBR, go the whole hog. The problem was in the past, we said, that's the only way. Oh, the chat's popped up. Oren is here. There you go. So Oren, sing out in the chat if you disagree with anything I'm saying. And then I'll pass on Oren's thoughts. Or you'll be able to see them in the chat yourself. So I think one of our mistakes was the previous people that looked after EBR have been pretty much saying the only way for EBR is for you to embrace it entirely. Everything about EBR you must grab, latch onto. That is the only way. Anything which is even partly that is just not worth the effort, etc. I disagree with that vehemently. Don't get me wrong, if you want to do it, it can be done. People have done it successfully. There are plenty of people out there in the community, such as Oren and others, who will gladly offer their guidance and advice to help you out, including Oracle. But that doesn't mean if you're not prepared to undertake that effort, that you should just go, oh, it's all too hard, I won't do it. I've known some customers who are not particularly heavily invested in Oracle technology. They view it as a Bitbucket database, but they still wanted to have zero downtime or less downtime. There are plenty of very adequate compromise solutions that can exploit EBR with minimal understanding of the technology. And perhaps one of the easiest examples there is a customer I worked with before I joined Oracle, we came up with a policy was if we were doing things that would not break the application, such as adding columns, very common thing you do to a table is you add columns. If you're adding new tables, then we would use EBR, because if you're adding indexes, adding constraints, adding columns, then there's a very good chance those things can be done without the existing application being even aware of it. Now, obviously the code base needs to be rolled forward to be aware of it. And that's where we drew the line at EBR. If we were changing triggers, PL SQL, etc., we would use EBR to roll those through changes with no downtime. So we could, any situation where the application deployment was adding columns, adding tables, adding indexes, adding constraints. You've got to be a little bit careful there if you're adding constraints to an existing table. But everything is additive, which is very common. And then you're changing the code base to reflect those additions. Then the code base changes and the DDL would be done via EBR. If we're doing something more significant, this table is now being broken up into two tables. This table that was originally one-to-one is now one-to-many. It's a parent-child now. We're re-architecting some tables, we're dropping columns, etc. Then rather than going to the next level of EBR, which is the cross-edition triggers, etc., we would simply take an outage. Now, what that means is rather than taking continuous delivery kind of model, rather than taking 50 outages a year, we're taking 7 outages a year. That's 43 outages saved using EBR in what I would call its simplest form. So hopefully Oren agrees with me. I think EBR is a fantastic piece of technology. I think we've sold it to our customers badly. We've told people that it's a beast to use and you have to use the beast. That's your only option. I disagree. It can be as simple or as complicated as you choose to allow it. And the more you head down the path, the more you get closer to never taking downtime. But the vast majority of the people are quite happy to take less downtime than the downtime they're currently taking to do the simplest of DDL changes. So yeah, so there we go. So all these things can be done. I think EBR is a wonderful piece of technology, and I think people should have a second look at it because I think we pitched it badly. And I think it's a very useful tool for many, many customers. So I'll finish up with this slide. As I've always said, thank you so much for your time tonight. I think, what are we, just after 10? Once I say goodbye, please jump over to the Apex one. They're doing a Q&A as well. Ask me anything. So similar kind of model to what I've done tonight. I say, please have a safe and festive and happy holiday period. And hopefully you've set yourself some goals for next year. I've set myself a 2023 challenge. And so hopefully this is, I'll stop the share there. I like doing these office hours sessions, and they end up being YouTube videos. As proof that I'd like you to set yourself some goals for next year in terms of your contributions to the community, I'll set myself this goal. So starting in January, not January 1st, but when I come back from my brief Christmas break in January, starting in January, I've set myself a goal of publishing a tech video on Oracle technology every single day for as long as I can. Now, that might be 2 days, it might be 10 days, it might be 20. But the target, my goal for 2023 is to, for as long as possible, publish a YouTube video every single day to help contribute that information to the community. So that's my challenge for myself for 2023. I hope you can come up with challenges for yourselves for how you're going to perhaps become a volunteer to user group. Make sure you submit for a local meetup, submit for a major conference, run an office meeting where you just get your own team together and talk about what's coming in the next version of the Oracle database. Come up with ways that you can contribute to your office community, the broader community, or the entire Oracle community, because I think that's how our entire community prospers. And with that note, hold on, I've got to finish off the year, obviously, in the right way. Got to finish off in the right way. See, can we celebrate? Hey, there we go. I have to say, obviously, that Oracle Corporation does not endorse or be drinking of alcohol on webinars, but Merry Christmas to you all. Cheers to you. I hope you've enjoyed the content this year. Thank you very much for your support of Office Hours and all that we do. And hopefully we'll see you all again next year. Bye for now, everyone.